Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are creating a satin bonnet. These are examples of bonnets I've created before. They are reversible, but I used the same color of fabric. But I do have one that I used a different type of fabric on top. It's still satin though. So I have two types of fabric today. I'll be using a cream one and a black one I had remaining from a previous project. For my measurements, I really can't offer any measurements right now because I used the hat the first time and it's still the same that I use. But one thing, when you're using such a hat to cut your measurements, you need to consider how curved the hat is toward the inside, and then you add that measurement to your fabric. Like I'm demonstrating, you just have to watch because I don't know how to explain this and I didn't have any tape measure. Next time I'll be having a video on making a different type of satin bonnet. I'll be sure to include measurements, but for now I would just ask you to observe what I'm doing. So this was me just measuring my fabric. I'm pretty sure there's a simpler way to do this, but for now I just have to work with this. It's pretty easy. You just have to observe how curved in your hat is toward the inside, and then you add that length to your fabric. I decided to iron my fabric a little bit just to get rid of the creases. Now this step is optional, but this is the piece of fabric I had remaining from a previous project, and so it was pretty much creased because I had stored it for like a month or so. But this step is optional. So this black fabric I had from a previous project, I really hope it was going to be enough, and it was enough, so I was just going to cut it round. So I can make a reversible bonnet. You can either wear it from the cream side or from the black side. And satin fabrics do have like the shinier side, and they also have a darker side that is not as shiny. I'm going to demonstrate that in a few. So here you just have to make sure that both shiny sides face away from each other and the wrong sides face each other, like that. And one rule you need to consider when you're using stretch satin, this is stretch satin in color cream, like the one I used in that bonnet, and I have a stretch satin in color black, the one I used in that bonnet. Now one rule you need to consider is the color of your thread should always match the color of the stretch satin you use, like I demonstrated. And so for this bonnet I'll be using the cream thread and the cream stretch satin. I'll begin my stitches. I'll be using two basic stitches. I'll use the running stitch and I'll use the back stitch later in the video. but I'll begin with a running stitch because it is good for creating a gathering effect, and we want our bonnet to have little gathers, and that is what I'm going for. So just follow the same pattern all round, and here is the outcome. So you can see the gathers are moving around a little bit. And for a bonnet, you don't want your gathers to be moving all around. They have to be in one place, if I can say that. So I'll go again with another stitch, but this time I'll be holding the gathers together, both from the inside and from the outside. And if your little gathers are not very uniform, you can always put them together, or you can always arrange them depending on how you want them to be. Whether you want them to be too close to each other or whether you want them to be a little sparse. And I did that all round. When you hold the gathers together, they will stop moving around, like I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And I forgot to mention, I'm using a single thread in this basic stitch. A single thread is where you run one piece of thread through the needle hole. You can see the gathers are not moving where I had them together, but they were still moving the other parts of the bonnet, and so I had to do that all round, and this was the outcome. So at this point I did try the bonnet just to see if it's going to fit on my head. I would recommend you do the same at this point. And then to finish off this first stitch, I'm going to create a knot. I do hope everyone knows how to create a knot because I didn't demonstrate that well. And here, this is when I will do the back stitch, but I'll do a back stitch using a double thread. So double thread is where you have two pieces of thread going through the needle hole, as I'm going to show you in a few minutes. A back stitch is always good because it creates a stronger hold for your fabric, and when you include a double thread, it gives an even stronger hold for your stitches. So I'll go in again around my bonnet, but this time I'll make sure that this stitch goes in between the previous stitches. Or in short, I'll just make sure my needle goes through where I had not stitched before, if that makes sense. And hand sewing is not easy, but it's also not hard. You just have to keep practicing. And also remember, we are trying to mimic a machine, so you just have to observe that your sewing is almost straight, if not straight. This is how the back stitch turned out. and we are almost having a bonnet now. And this is the part where we now attach the stretch satin to the bonnet. I usually like measuring before I start sewing. So just hold some piece of fabric around your head so you can create a bonnet that better suits you, one that is not going to be too tight or too loose. Once you measure your piece of fabric, you just fold it twice. And this is the part you should wear your bonnet from. But before we attach this stretch satin to the bonnet, we are going to create a headband kind of look. I don't know how to explain this, but this is how you best stitch or sew two sides of the same fabric together. And this is how it should look like. I'm not really concerned about having a clean stitch in this one because this part of the bonnet will go at the back of my head. I finished later and I did attach it to the bonnet. And I just have to make sure that one piece of the stretch satin goes on the inside of the bonnet and the other piece goes on the outside. Or you just make that the edge of your bonnet is in between these two. That's the best way I can explain it. But you can always observe and see what I'm doing. And I also began with a single thread and a back stitch. This is how it turned out, but I had to go in with another this is the second time I'm sewing it using double thread and making sure that my sewing pattern is close to that which I had used before. Now just go with the same pattern, the same stitches all around, and this was the end result. And to clean up the extra pieces of fabric, I went in with scissors and just to cut them out, creating a better finished look. Now do the same on the outside part. This whole process took me about 5 hours, so it doesn't really take much time. So I'll also even out the pieces of fabric on the outside. I do hope I took you through every step. If you have a question, you can just ask me. Maybe I would explain it better. But this is how it turned out. This was a medium size satin bonnet. I do have a large one, I have a bigger one, different sizes. And all these are hand sewn, by the way. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to